In fact, last night when you fell asleep and you went into dream sleep, you became incredibly psychotic.
Excuse me.
Now, before you reject my diagnosis of your nighttime psychosis, let me give you 5 good reasons. When you went into dream sleep last night, you started to see things which were not there, so you were hallucinating. Second, you believed things that couldn't possibly be true, so you were delusional. Third, you became confused about time, place, and person. So in psychiatry, we call that being disorientated. Fourth, you had wildly fluctuating emotions, something that we call being emotionally labile. You're all over the place. And then how wonderful, you and I, because I'll include myself now as being psychotic, you and I, we both woke up this morning and we forgot most, if not all, of that dream experience. So we're suffering from amnesia. If you were to experience any one of those 5 symptoms whilst you're awake, you'd be seeking some degree of psychological help. But for reasons that we're only now understanding, it seems to be a normal biological and psychological process. So what are the reasons? Why do we dream? We dream for at least 2 different reasons. The first reason is emotional first aid. REM sleep is what I've defined as overnight therapy. And it's during dream sleep where your brain takes difficult, painful emotional experiences and it acts like a nocturnal soothing balm. And it just takes the sharp edges off those difficult, painful experiences so that you come back the next day and you have a memory of an emotional event, but it's no longer emotional. You don't have that same visceral regurgitation of that same emotional charge. Why is REM sleep able to do this overnight therapy, this depotentiation? Why is REM sleep able to sort of strip the bitter emotional rind from the informational orange, as it were? The reason is the following. Dream sleep, REM sleep, is the only time during the 24-hour period where the brain shuts off a stress-related neurochemical called noradrenaline. Now, you've heard of the sister chemical downstairs in your body called adrenaline. Well, upstairs in the brain, we don't have adrenaline, we have noradrenaline. REM sleep is the only time where it's completely shut off. And what we put forward is a theory called overnight therapy, where your brain has, as I told you, these emotional centers and these memory centers, the emotional centers, the amygdala, the memory centers, the hippocampus. You reactivate those structures when you go into dream sleep. So your brain gets the chance to reactivate and replay and reprocess emotional experiences. However, it's doing it in a quote unquote safe neurochemical environment because that stress chemical of noradrenaline is completely shut off. So it's the ideal neurochemical therapy for stripping the emotion from the memory. And we put forward a theory that perhaps the quintessential disorder where this fails is PTSD. Because when you speak to those patients, not only do we see that their REM sleep is disrupted, when you speak to those patients, they will say, look, I just can't, quote unquote, get over the event. What they mean by that is the war veteran who's now going to the supermarket and they come outside and they're in the car park and the car backfires and they instantly have the flashback to the sort of detonation on the military field. And what's happening there is that the brain has not stripped the emotion from the memory. So every time they relive the memory, they regurgitate that same emotional reaction. So no wonder we proposed that the brain then comes back the following night and says, look, I'm sorry, sleep. I've still got this trauma memory. Can you do your trick of stripping the emotion from the memory? And it fails again. So the next night it comes back and says, I'm sorry to bother you, but I've still got this emotionally charged memory. Please do your trick of stripping the emotion from memory. It fails again. This sounds like the broken record of repetitive nightmares that we see in PTSD. Why could this be happening? Levels of noradrenaline in the brain in patients with PTSD are too high. And I was at a conference some years ago where I was presenting this theory. We just presented this theory. It was a theory, and it was in search of data. And it turns out at the same conference, it was one of those incredible moments, you get hairs on the back of your neck. There was a psychiatrist from Puget Sound, which is just outside of Seattle on the west coast of America. And he had been treating his war veterans in the Veterans Administration with a blood pressure medication called prazosin. Now, it turns out that prazosin, it's a generic drug because it's the Veterans Administration, so it's cheap, and it crosses the blood-brain barrier.